It started like any other quiet afternoon for Ethan Cole, heir to a vast business empire, lounging in the plush corner booth of a five-star restaurant. The hum of conversation, the clink of crystal glasses, and the scent of expensive cuisine wrapped around him like a familiar luxury. His life had always been predictable: wealth, influence, and the unshakable certainty that he knew exactly where he came from. But then she appeared. A woman in a crisp Waitress uniform approached his table, her posture steady, her eyes unwavering. "Ethan Cole," she said softly, but with a conviction that cut through the noise around them. "I'm your mother." For a heartbeat, Ethan thought it was some kind of bizarre prank. His friends had played cruel jokes before, but there was something in her gaze, an unflinching certainty, that made his smirk falter. "I think you're mistaken," he replied, but even as the words left his mouth, a strange unease began to gnaw at him. The woman, Danielle Brooks, didn't flinch. "Your father never told you the truth. He's kept me out of your life since the day you were born." Her tone carried no bitterness, only a quiet weight that made Ethan's stomach tighten. In that instant, the gilded walls of his perfect life seemed to tremble. Who was this woman? And why did her voice feel like it carried a piece of him he never knew was missing? Somewhere deep down, Ethan sensed that whatever truth she carried would change everything. Ethan sat frozen in the booth long after Danielle Brooks had walked away, the last echo of her words still reverberating in his mind. "I'm your mother." It sounded absurd, impossible even. He had grown up under the care of Gregory Cole, a man whose wealth, discipline, and public image had shaped every corner of Ethan's life. His father was meticulous about family, at least in public. The idea that Gregory could hide something so monumental felt like a cruel fantasy spun by a stranger with an agenda. And yet, he couldn't shake the look in Danielle's eyes. It wasn't the desperate pleading of a con artist or the calculated charm of someone fishing for money. It was the steady, unshakable gaze of someone who believed every word she said. The longer Ethan replayed that moment, the more his initial certainty began to fray. For 2 days, he tried to ignore it. He buried himself in meetings, dinners, and the endless parade of social obligations that came with being the only child of a business magnate. But no matter how loud the world around him got, Danielle's voice cut through the noise like a sharp, persistent bell. He found himself staring out of his penthouse window at night, wondering why a complete stranger's claim felt so personal. By the third evening, he could no longer pretend it didn't matter. If Danielle was lying, he needed to confront her and end the charade. But if she wasn't, then the foundation of the dash, everything he knew, was about to crack wide open. Ethan decided the only person who could clear the fog was Gregory himself. That night, he drove to his father's estate, a sprawling mansion that seemed to stretch endlessly under the moonlight. He had walked those marble halls since childhood, memorizing every ornate pillar, every gilded frame, every symbol of the family's untouchable status. But as he stepped inside, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Gregory was in his study, as always. The scent of aged leather and expensive scotch clung to the room. He didn't look up immediately when Ethan entered, his pen gliding over a set of contracts. "Something on your mind, son?" Gregory's tone was calm, almost distracted. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "Someone approached me at the restaurant the other day," he began slowly, "she said. She's my mother." The pen froze mid-signature. For a brief moment, Gregory's jaw tightened, and a flicker of something regret, annoyance, crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He set the pen down carefully, folding his hands on the desk. "And you believed her?" he asked evenly. "I didn't say I believed her," Ethan replied, his voice sharper than he intended. "But she knew my name. She looked me in the eye like she wasn't making it up. I need to know if there's any truth to it." Gregory leaned back in his chair, studying his son. "Ethan, I've worked my entire life to build something for you. To give you stability, safety, a name that commands respect. The past, it's messy. Sometimes it's better to leave it buried." "That's not an answer," Ethan shot back. "Did you know her? Is she my mother or not?" A long silence filled the room. Gregory's eyes drifted to the dark window behind Ethan, as though he was searching for a way to sidestep the truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Yes," he said at last. "Danielle and I. We were together briefly. But I was young, unprepared, and our family made it clear she wasn't suitable. When you were born, they pressured us both. I thought keeping you here, away from her, was the best thing. For you. Ethan's stomach twisted. The best thing for me? You think tearing me away from my mother? Without telling me was a gift? Gregory's gaze hardened. You wouldn't have understood back then. And you had a good life. Here. Every opportunity, every door opened for you. That doesn't erase the lie, Ethan said, his voice shaking. You didn't just protect me, you controlled me. You decided who I got to know, who I got to love. You took that choice away. Gregory sighed and reached for his glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid. I made mistakes, Ethan. But I did it to protect you from a life that could have been chaotic, unstable. Ethan stood, pacing the room, his hands tightening into fists. You protected me from the truth, not chaos. You didn't even give me the chance to know her. You decided that for me. And you never looked back. Gregory set the glass down, his expression unreadable. I can't change the past. But I can tell you this, whatever she's told you, she wasn't ready either. We both made choices we thought were best at the time. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at his father, really looked at him. For years, Gregory Cole had been the symbol of stability and authority in his life. Now, he seemed smaller, his certainty cracked. I don't even know who I am anymore, Ethan admitted quietly. Everything I thought I knew about my family is wrong. Gregory's shoulders slumped, a rare display of weariness. You're still my son, that hasn't changed, but it had changed, everything had. Ethan could feel it in his chest, a sharp ache where trust used to be. Without another word, he turned toward the door. Ethan, Gregory called after him. Whatever you decide, remember that I did love you, in my way. Ethan didn't turn around. Your way cost me my mother. As he stepped out into the cold night air, Ethan realized this conversation had only deepened the questions. Danielle's steady gaze at the restaurant replayed in his mind, her certainty now confirmed by Gregory's reluctant admission. She wasn't lying. She wasn't delusional. She was his mother. But if she had been telling the truth all along, what else had Gregory hidden? And why now, after all these years, had she decided to come forward? Ethan knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. He had confronted his father and gotten a piece of the truth, but the rest of it, the part that could explain the years of silence and absence, was still with Danielle. And whether it hurt or healed him, he was going to find it. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The echo of Gregory's reluctant confession replayed in his mind like a broken record. Yes, Danielle and I were together. Yes, she's your mother. Each repetition felt heavier, pressing against his chest until it was hard to breathe. The man he had idolized for years, whose approval he had chased like oxygen, had just admitted to dismantling the truth of his life. Before he was even old enough to understand what truth was, he sat at the edge of his bed in the early hours, staring at the city skyline. The blinking lights, in the distance, usually felt like symbols of possibility. Tonight, they seemed cold and distant, mirroring the hollow space inside him. When morning came, Ethan forced himself to return to the estate. He needed more than the fractured explanation Gregory had offered. The words, family pressure and best for you, weren't enough to stitch together the gaping hole in his understanding. Gregory was in the sunroom, reading the financial section of the paper, his coffee untouched. Beside him. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, watching him. This was the man who had provided every comfort, every privilege, and yet had denied him the most basic human truth, the right to know his own mother. I need the whole story, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Gregory folded the paper slowly, setting it aside. I told you what mattered. No, Ethan cut in, sharper than before. You gave me a headline. I need the details. All of ... them. Gregory's jaw worked as if he were chewing on the decision to speak. Finally, he gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. Ethan lowered himself into the seat, his posture rigid, his pulse thrumming in his ears. It was years ago, Gregory began, his voice measured, almost too calm. Before the company became what it is today. I met Danielle at a charity event in the city. She was nothing like the people in our circle, no pretense, no performance. Just herself. We started seeing each other in secret. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Ethan swallowed hard. He could picture it, Gregory, in his younger days, chasing something genuine in a world built on appearances. When she told me she was pregnant, Gregory continued, I thought we could make it work. But the moment my parents found out, everything changed. They told me she didn't belong in our world, that bringing her into the family would ruin everything they'd built. They called her unfit, not because of who she was, but because she didn't have money, connections, the right name. Ethan clenched his fists under the table. He had grown up seeing that ruthless side of the Cole family turned toward business rivals, never imagining it had been used to erase his own mother from his life. I tried to fight them at first, Gregory admitted, but I was young, and they had power over everything, my inheritance, my future in the company. They threatened to cut me off entirely, and more than that, they threatened her. They made her life unbearable. She was harassed, followed, her reputation dragged through the mud in ways that would make it impossible for her to live peacefully. Ethan's voice was low, but laced with fury. So you gave up. You let them win. Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of defensiveness passing through. I thought I was protecting both of you. I arranged for her to be taken care of financially, made sure she was safe, but the condition was that she'd stay away. She agreed, Ethan. She agreed because we both thought you'd have a better life without the chaos. Better life? Ethan's voice cracked on the words. You mean a life built on lies? You talk about protection like it's a gift, but it was a cage. You didn't protect me. You isolated me from the one person who had the right to be there from the start. Gregory's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked older than Ethan had ever seen. All him. I regret it. Every day. But at the time, I believed it was the only way. I told myself you'd grow up without the stigma, without the constant scrutiny. I convinced myself you'd thank me. Someday. Ethan shook his head, his chest tightening. You convinced yourself because it was easier than standing up to them. You've taught me my whole life that leadership is about courage, but when it came to your own son, you didn't have any. The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Gregory didn't respond immediately. He turned to look out the window, the morning light catching in his silver hair. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Gregory said finally. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to understand that I never stopped thinking about her, or about you. I kept tabs on her life from a distance. She worked hard, moved cities a few times. She never married. I think she stayed away because she didn't want to confuse you. Ethan's throat tightened. He thought back to the way Danielle had looked at him in the restaurant. No bitterness. No accusations. Just quiet certainty. The truth in her eyes had been real, because she had lived it for decades. You could have told me at any point, Ethan said, his voice soft but laced with exhaustion. When I turned 18. When I graduated college. Even last week. You had 1,000 chances to give me the truth, and you chose silence every time. Gregory's gaze met his, steady but heavy with something Ethan couldn't quite name. Because once I told you, nothing would be the same. And I was right. Nothing is the same. Now, is it? Ethan stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the marble floor. It's not. And maybe that's a good thing. For the first time in his life, he felt the invisible chain between them loosen, not in the way that freed him completely, but in a way that made room for him to step into his own truth. He wasn't just Gregory Cole's son anymore. He was also Danielle Brooks' son. And that part of him, buried and ignored for so long, was finally clawing its way to the surface. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. Gregory didn't call after him. This time. Outside, the winter air hit Ethan like a shock, crisp and clean. The world hadn't changed, but he had. The lie that had shaped his entire life had finally been exposed, and while the truth hurt, it also felt like a kind of liberation. He knew what he had to do next. The story wasn't complete, not until he heard Danielle's side in full, directly from her lips. And this time, he was ready to listen. The cold air outside Gregory's estate clung to Ethan's skin, but it couldn't numb the fire burning in his chest. He walked to his car in silence, each step feeling heavier than the last. The truth had been spoken, but instead of bringing relief, it had carved a deep wound that no apology could stitch together. For most of his life, Ethan had worn his identity like a tailored suit, neatly pressed, perfectly fitted, and undeniably his. He was Gregory Cole's son, heir to the Cole fortune, raised with the certainty that his life had been built on solid ground. Now, it felt as though that suit had been ripped away, exposing him to a cold reality he had never been prepared to face. He gripped the steering wheel when he got into the car, staring straight ahead without starting the engine. Questions swirled in his head like a storm he couldn't control. If my father could lie about something this big, what else has he hidden? How much of my life has been shaped by half-truths and careful omissions? By the time he drove back to his apartment, the city's lights blurred into a haze. He didn't remember the turns he took, or the streets he passed. His mind was still in that study, hearing Gregory's voice admit to a betrayal so deep it felt personal in every cell of his body. Inside, Ethan poured himself a glass of water, but his hands shook as he set it down. He thought about birthdays spent in the mansion's grand dining room, his father's hand on his shoulder, as they posed for photographs. The pride in Gregory's eyes, back then, had seemed genuine now. He wondered if it had been pride in the son he was raising, or relief that the way truth had stayed buried. The more he thought about it, the more the betrayal cut in different directions. It wasn't just about Danielle. It was about trust, about the quiet belief that his father would always tell him the truth when it mattered. That belief was gone now, replaced with a hollow space that made him question everything. Even his own achievements felt tainted. He had gone to the best schools, traveled the world, and stepped effortlessly into high-profile roles in the family company. But were those opportunities given to him because Gregory believed in him, or because Gregory wanted to keep him close, under the constant shadow of his control? Ethan moved to the couch, sinking into the leather cushions, but there was no comfort in them. Tonight. He scrolled through his phone without really seeing the screen, his thumb pausing over old photos, graduations, family trips, business galas. In every one, Gregory was there, a solid presence. But now, those images looked staged, like scenes from a play in which Ethan had been cast without knowing the script. The shock was bad enough, but the sense of loss was worse. He hadn't lost his father physically, but he had lost the man he thought Gregory was. The man he trusted, admired, and, in some ways, feared, gone, replaced by someone capable of reshaping reality to protect an image. Sleep refused to come. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling as though the walls of his life were closing in. In the quiet darkness, he let himself imagine what it would have been like to grow up with Danielle in his life. Would she have told him bedtime stories? Taken him to school? Been there at the big moments, cheering him on not because of his last name, but because he was her son? The thought tightened something in his chest until it hurt to breathe. It wasn't just about being lied to, it was about everything he had been denied. The small, invisible moments that shaped a child's sense of belonging. The simple knowledge of where he came from. All of it stripped away before he even had a choice. By dawn, Ethan had made a decision. He needed space from Gregory, from the estate, from the version of himself that had blindly accepted every truth handed to him. He spent the morning packing a small bag, tossing in clothes without much thought. The apartment felt suffocating, full of the life that had been constructed for him rather than chosen by him. Before leaving, he paused by the framed photograph on his desk, one of him and Gregory, shaking hands at his first company event. It had always been his favorite, a symbol of pride and partnership. Now it felt like a reminder of the false foundation under their relationship. He turned it face down and walked out the door. The city felt different that day. Louder, somehow. The honking of taxis, the rush of footsteps, the chatter of strangers, it all blended into a chaotic symphony that matched the noise in his head. He wandered aimlessly, letting the streets carry him without a destination. Every interaction he passed, a mother holding her child's hand, a father laughing with his son, hit him like a small, sharp blow. Those were the connections he had been robbed of. Gregory had decided, without his consent, that he didn't need them. And now, decades later, Ethan was left piecing together who he was without the carefully curated narrative he'd been fed. At a quiet park bench, he finally sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He thought about Danielle again, her voice steady but not cold, her eyes holding a truth he had felt before he even heard it confirmed. She had been out there all these years, living her life, carrying the weight of their separation. And yet, when she had approached him, there had been no anger in her face. Just recognition. That recognition scared him almost as much as it comforted him. If she could look at him and see her son, then maybe there was a part of him that had been missing all along. But to find it, he would have to step outside of the shadow Gregory had built for him. The realization came slowly, but it was steady. His life as he knew it had ended the moment Danielle said those words in the restaurant. Everything after that would be about rebuilding. Not just relationships, but himself. As the sun began to set, Ethan rose from the bench. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it was a flicker of something else. Not hope exactly, but a determination to reclaim the pieces of his life that had been taken before he even knew they were his. And he knew exactly where he needed to start. 2 days after leaving his apartment behind, Ethan finally called Danielle. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of urgency he couldn't hide. "I need to see you," he said simply. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then her calm reply. "Name the place." They met in a small corner cafe tucked away on a quiet street, nothing like the lavish dining rooms Ethan had grown up in. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and roasted coffee. He arrived early, restless, tracing the rim of his cup until the door opened and Danielle stepped in. She was wearing a simple coat, her hair pulled back, and yet she carried herself with a quiet grace that seemed immune to the years and the miles between them. When she sat down across from him, there was no hesitation in her eyes, only the same steady focus that had unsettled him in the restaurant. "I spoke to Gregory," Ethan began, his voice low. "He told me some of it. About you. About why you weren't there." Danielle's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what did he say?" "That his family forced you out. That you agreed to stay away for my sake." She nodded, looking down at her hands for a moment before speaking. "That much is true. But the way it happened, it wasn't just a choice. It was survival." Ethan leaned forward, bracing himself. "When I found out I was pregnant," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made his chest tighten, "I wanted to believe Gregory would stand by me. For a while, he did. But when his family learned about me, they decided I wasn't suitable. They made it their mission to remove me from the picture. They didn't just ask me to leave, Ethan, they threatened me. They made it clear that if I stayed, you would grow up in the middle of a war you didn't choose. They had money, lawyers, influence. I had none of that." Her gaze lifted to meet his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of pain behind her. Composure. "They offered me money to go quietly. I didn't take it. But I did walk away. Because I thought you'd have a better life without the chaos, the scandal, the constant whispers. I thought I was protecting you, even if it meant losing you." Ethan's throat tightened. "You really believed I'd be better off without you?" "I didn't want to believe it," she admitted, her voice softening. "But I was 23, alone, and facing people who could crush me with a phone call. I told myself you'd grow up with every opportunity I couldn't give you, and maybe, one day, when you were old enough, you'd come find me. That hope. It's what kept me going." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent days nursing anger at her absence, imagining that she had simply chosen another life. But now, hearing how she had been pushed out, he realized she had been carrying her own burden all these years. "You didn't fight for me," he said, the hurt still sharp in his voice. "I fought in the only way I could," she replied quietly. "By letting you go. By staying away so you wouldn't have to watch me be torn apart in front of you. It wasn't the kind of fight you wanted, but it was the only one I could survive." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe's background chatter filled the silence, a strange reminder that the world outside hadn't changed, even as Ethan's own world shifted. Again. He exhaled slowly, his anger giving way to something heavier, understanding, laced with grief. "You never stopped thinking about me?" Her eyes softened. "Not for a single day." And in that moment, Ethan realized that while the years they had lost could never be returned, the connection between them was still there, fragile but real. It would take time to rebuild, but at least now, the truth was no longer buried. The meeting with Danielle left Ethan with a storm in his chest. Her voice, steady yet edged, with pain, replayed in his mind on the drive home. She had lived in exile from her own son, not because she didn't want him, but because Gregory's family had made it impossible for her to stay. That knowledge turned the ember of betrayal in Ethan's heart into a full blaze. By the time he reached the city, his decision was made. This conversation with his father wasn't going to wait. Gregory was in his study when Ethan arrived at the estate, just as he had been the last time. The familiar smell of leather and old books filled the air, but tonight it felt suffocating. Gregory looked up from a document, his expression cool but unreadable. "Back so soon?" he asked. Ethan didn't bother with pleasantries. "I spoke to Danielle." Gregory's eyes flickered just for a second before settling into a guarded calm. And she told me everything," Ethan said, his voice tight. "How your family threatened her. How you let them push her out. How you decided I didn't need to know my own mother." Gregory set his pen down with deliberate slowness. I told you I was protecting you. No, Ethan snapped, stepping closer to the desk. Stop saying that. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. Your image. Your place in the family. And you did it at the cost of my life with her. Gregory's jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure I was under back then. They had the power to destroy everything. If I had defied them, you think I care about the empire you built? Ethan cut in, his voice rising. I care about the years I lost. I care about the birthdays she missed, the moments we never had. You decided I didn't need those things, and you never once gave me a choice. A muscle in Gregory's cheek twitched. If I had told you as a child, it would have confused you. Ethan slammed his palm onto the desk, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Confused me? I was already confused, Dad. I just didn't know why. All those times I asked about Mom and you brushed it off. You looked me in the eye and lied. And for what? So I could grow up, thinking the world we lived in was perfect? Gregory stood now, his voice hardening. That world gave you everything. Everything you are today. Ethan shook his head, cutting him off again. Everything I am today is in spite of what you did, not because of it. I had opportunities, yes, but I also had a hole in my life that I didn't understand until now. And knowing the truth, knowing you chose to keep her away, makes every one of those opportunities feel like they came with a price tag I never agreed to. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Gregory's posture softened just slightly, but his voice was still low and firm. You think I haven't paid for it? I've lived with that choice for decades. Ethan's voice dropped, quiet but full of weight. Living with it isn't the same as facing it. You buried the truth and called it protection. You don't get to decide that for me. Not then, and not now. Gregory looked away, as if the weight of his son's stare was too much. What do you want me to say, Ethan? I want you to admit that you were wrong. That you stole something from both of us. And I want you to understand that this, Ethan gestured between them, isn't something we can just fix with an apology. You can't give me those years back. Gregory's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him. I was wrong, he said finally, the words sounding almost foreign in his mouth. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now. I wasn't. Ethan nodded once, his jaw tight. That's a start. But if we're going to have any kind of relationship from here on out, it has to be built on the truth. No more lies. No more omissions. I can't live in the shadow of what you want me to believe anymore. Gregory didn't respond right away, but his silence was answer enough. Ethan turned toward the door, his hand on the knob, before he paused. One more thing, he said without looking back. You didn't just take her from me, you took me from her. And that's something neither of us will ever forget. He left the study without another word, the weight of the conversation pressing against his shoulders. But for the first time, he felt like he had said what needed to be said. The rest, if there was a rest, would be up to Gregory. A week passed before Ethan gathered the courage to call Danielle again. The conversation with Gregory still weighed heavily on him, but the emptiness it left had only made one thing clearer: he couldn't move forward without hearing more from her, without trying to piece together the parts of his life that had been kept from him. They met at a small botanical garden on the edge of the city, a quiet place away from the noise. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the sound of water trickling from a stone fountain filled the pauses in their conversation. I didn't know if you'd want to see me again, Danielle admitted as they walked slowly along a winding path lined with blooming camellias. I do, Ethan replied. But I need you to be honest with me, completely honest. I've had enough half-truths to last a lifetime. She nodded, her expression calm but tinged with sadness. I'll tell you anything you want to know. But I can't promise it won't hurt. Ethan gave a faint smile. It already hurts. But maybe that's the only way we can start fixing it. They found a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, and for the next hour, Danielle filled in the gap stories of the day he was born. The months she tried to stay close despite the pressure. The countless birthdays she spent wondering what he looked like, whether he was happy, whether he knew she loved him. By the end, neither of them could pretend the years apart hadn't left scars. But there was also something new between them, a fragile willingness to try. I can't make up for the time we lost, Danielle said softly, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't just see a stranger claiming to be his mother. He saw the woman who had carried the weight of their separation, as much as he had. Then maybe we can start here, he said. And see where it takes us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Weeks after his conversations with both Danielle and Gregory, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The sharp edge of anger had dulled, replaced by a quieter determination. He met Gregory one evening at the estate, not in the study where old lies had lived, but in the garden, where the air felt lighter. I'm not saying we can erase the past, Ethan told him, but if we're going to have a relationship, it has to be real this time. No masks. No secrets. Gregory's answer was a slow nod, the kind that carried both regret and hope. Then let's start. Again, he said. From that day, Ethan began splitting his family dinners with Gregory that focused on honesty rather than image, and long walks with Danielle where they learned each other's lives. From the missing years, the wealth, the grand homes, the status. All of it felt meaningless, compared to these moments rooted in truth. For the first time, Ethan found peace not in the security his last name brought, but in the genuine bonds he was rebuilding. Sometimes, the richest life isn't the one filled with privilege or possessions, it's the one built on truth, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. Broken relationships can heal, but only when both sides choose honesty over pride. If you've ever had to rebuild a bond after betrayal, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful, heartfelt stories that remind us what truly matters in life.